Hello everyone and welcome to the last round recap of the Women's Candidates 2026. It's been an amazing event with so many nice games and the fight was so close all the way until the final round. Today we are looking at the most important game that decided the eventual winner of the tournament and the next World Championship challenger. Vaishali Rameshbabu was leading the tournament and playing as white against Kateryna Lagno, who also needed to win to have a shot at the title. Vaishali's white plays e4 and Lagno as black replies c5. Both need to fight for the win, so we have an aggressive Sicilian on the board. Knight f3, d6 and d4, so the open Sicilian was chosen, which usually promises fun and dynamic positions. Black took, white took, and now knight f6 and g6, the Sicilian dragon. This is definitely an aggressive opening for a must-win game because there's often opposite side castling, with black castling kingside and white castling queenside. I was curious about this decision and I looked it up and noticed that Lagno doesn't usually play the dragon. I could only find 3 games of hers from 15 years ago. She has been playing only e4, e5 this whole candidates tournament, so this was definitely intended as more of a surprise preparation. But what was funny about this is that Vaishali ended up surprising Lagno instead. For now, they played the main line with bishop e3. I also looked at Vaishali's games, and she played bishop e3 once, and bishop e2 with short castle the other 3 times, which is not a lot of data, so I'm not sure which exact line Lagno and her team were targeting, but the dragon is always an interesting choice nonetheless. So we got bishop e3 and then f3. This is the main line. I am sure both of them were familiar with. So now black castles kingside and white will prepare castling queenside. Black goes knight c6. And this is what Vaishali has played once before, g4. And usually the lines go bishop e6, there's also knight d4 with theoretical positions. But in the game she goes for a long castle and d5. So far we are following the absolute main line, but now something changes. The most played line for white is to take, and after black takes back, there's some more trades, and bishop d4. This offers the trade, but black can decline it. Now bishop c5, and black can even leave this rook hanging and play bishop e6, and then white doesn't want to take it. So these are all theoretical lines. People fight it out in theory starting from here. The second most popular line is queen e1, and Vaishali's move played in the game is the third, so it still very much exists. After d5, she played knight takes c6. Black needs to take back, and this was the key moment. Vaishali plays bishop c4 without any hesitation. This move itself is okay, it's pretty good. The engine likes it. It has been played about 100 times, which makes it a sideline, not a main line. But what was so impressive to me was that Vaishali manages to surprise Lagno, who went into the unexpected dragon. And this is not the first time that Vaishali does this. I noticed that she has very good general prep, so even when she's surprised out of the opening, it doesn't faze her because she still has a little something prepared in almost everything. Now Lagno takes about 30 minutes to make her move, which is a lot. This always happens when you try to play something a bit newer for yourself, and it's tough to react to the sidelines. The best move here is e6, which I'm sure she calculated, to which white usually responds with the bishop going back, although it could stay because that pin still exists, but it's good for it to go back. And then knight a4, usually with the plan to put a piece on c5 and play h4, and the game goes on with counterplay for both sides. But what she does in the game is bishop to e6 after a long think. This move itself is typical for the dragon, but here it looks a little bit off and it does lose a pawn. Vaishali takes. And we got a series of captures that follow, and white ends up winning that d5 pawn. So giving up this pawn is pretty usual in the dragon. Sometimes that pawn gets sacrificed so that black gets this dragon bishop that is very, very good at attacking, and also the b and the c files to attack the white king. But here things are a little bit different, and Vaishali is actually pretty safe and has a healthy extra pawn on her side. But still, you need to defend correctly in such positions to actually make that pawn worth something. So after rook b8, the b2 pawn is attacked, and white correctly defends with bishop b3. Now the queen trade is offered, and black wants to avoid it and keep some attack going. Now the threat is to take on b3 twice, because this pawn is pinned. So king b1. This is the only move that keeps white's advantage and gets rid of that b3 threat. Black still takes and plays a5. Very understandable to start this attack. The computer gives a pretty good advantage to white because of the extra pawn, but it's definitely far from clear in a real game, because black does have some threats. So these positions are always going to be double-edged by default, because these kings are on complete opposite sides, so black will try everything to open it up. Vaishali goes bishop d4. This is a very good move. That dragon bishop is black's best piece, so if you can trade it off, you try. But Lagno says no thank you and plays e5. The bishop retreats, now a4, that's what the pawn wants to do. White has an important choice here of whether to lock up the position or play the capture. b4 was a little bit safer long term, but Vaishali decided to take. So black didn't just sacrifice this pawn, they regain it pretty easily with queen c4. And now even if b3, that pawn gets taken. And black's pieces seem a bit closer to the action, so already the queen and the rook are attacking. But so far, white is also defending great, and none of black's sacrifices or anything works. Lagno wants to double the rooks, so plays rook b5 while also defending the e5 pawn. Then rook e4 targets that queen. White offers another queen trade, and Lagno doesn't want to trade queens. So far, they're maneuvering a bit, and all safe. These positions are always going to be objectively better for the side with the extra pawn, but that's provided that white can be precise and actually survive these threats. But if she does, then white is going to win the endgame. So black cannot back down and needs to start creating threats on the a file, and that's what Lagno does. The rook goes to a5, bishop c3, and rook a6. So far, black is still trying to find that piece placement on the a file. Queen trades are getting avoided left and right. So far, just some shuffling. The second rook comes to the a file. Vaishali goes rook c5, which has a few ideas attacking that e5 pawn and also potentially doubling the rooks on the d file. And we get to one of the toughest situations. Black is almost ready to strike and white needs to play precisely. Both are at about 15 minutes on the clock. Here, there's a few things to consider. First of all, is that e5 pawn is pretty immune to being captured. If white ever tries to do it, for example like this, then things are really not looking good because that bishop can join the attack and checkmate. And this idea comes up often. This is what black wants in their dream world. If something like rook c7, computer loves rook c7 with, I guess, some ideas of doubling on the 7th rank, but it also needs some precision. And another idea for white is to double the rooks here. In the game, though, she plays g4, which is considered an inaccuracy, but although this move was criticized by the engine and the commentators, it actually ended up being pretty important later, and we will soon find out why. The reason why this move wasn't great was that it gave black time to triple up on the a file. With queen e7, and white is kind of struggling a bit with the coordination. The rook is attacked, so it needs to move away. Let's say it moves here. And the game actually turns somewhat equal because the threats are pretty big. White needs to defend. So white tries to exchange the rooks in this theoretical line. This is not what happened in the game. But then black also has some initiative like this, e4, threatening mate. This endgame is equal. And same thing against some other defenses like rook c6. Also fairly equal chances for both. But in the game, Lagno doesn't play queen e7 and takes the pawn instead. And we will see why that matters very soon. Black goes king h7. Understandable. Lagno wants to play... She wants rook d8 to come without a check. But what she didn't expect is that her king is going to become a target. So the rooks double, queen tries to come closer, and rook a2. This was a very, very tense moment. If you want to live through that intensity yourself, you can imagine that the candidates are at stake and you can try to find the winning idea yourself at this point. What would you play as white? There's only 2 moves that win, and everything else would spoil the advantage. So before we get to the correct moves, let's see how white can easily mess this position up. Let's say queen f3, threatening a very logical check. Then there's rook b2 and e4, and suddenly white loses a queen. Same thing on queen d3. If you play something a bit too slow, for example, like h3, then there's queen a6, and now the black pieces are in time to make some serious threats. The 2 moves that win are g5 and h4. I think h4 is much less clear, and it only wins through queen a6 and c4. All of this business, which is still findable, but a little bit scary. And rook b5 saves the day in the end. But I really like Vaishali's g5. She finds this move, and it's very strong for 2 reasons. One is that it doesn't let bishop h6 ideas happen ever again, and sometimes that was very significant when, if we calculate any of these sacrifices, or if the king ever has to run away to c1, that check is very, very annoying. So that's one thing. And another second idea is queen to h4. Suddenly, the black king could become endangered. So this was a very, very strong move by Vaishali. Lagno plays queen b6, which prevents rook d8. And the idea is that the regular queen a6 doesn't work because of that check. And this is winning. It's winning in many ways, but a nice way is queen b4. So instead, queen goes here, trying to prevent that check. So queen h4 happens, and then back to e4. This was a very smart and practical choice, and Vaishali does not want a draw. Of course, she has to win this event. She's repeating moves for the sake of getting closer to move 40, and getting that extra time on the clock is so important. They're at move 38 right now. Both have about 5 minutes on their clocks. Lagno plays, she could repeat. Then I think Vaishali would think what to play. Of course, she wouldn't repeat it 3 times. This is a tough call. The right idea here is rook d7. And after queen a5, the mate on a1 is threatened very immediately. So the only save here is king to c1. It's a bit hard to find, but to be honest, there's no other alternative. c4 is not as good because there is rook a1. That rook cannot be taken because this would even win for black. And king c2, this is still better for white, but it's not quite as convincing. So instead, king c1, you could probably find this move out of not having any other option. And even if black does sacrifice, it doesn't lead to anything. And again, hides away very soon. This would mean Vaishali would need to find this move, which I'm not sure she would find, but maybe that's what she had in mind. And we'll never find out what she meant to do instead of that repetition, because in the game, Lagno goes rook a4. She decides to risk it all for a risky idea because she knows that once they get that extra time, all of these risky moves are not going to work as well. So she goes for it right away. And this is the moment of truth. Because if Vaishali has a win, she needs to find it now. And there's 2 moves left until move 40. So she finds the first part, which is giving a check. And the reason why this move is very tricky is it cannot be taken because of the checkmate. And if queen to a4, which looks good at first, it's not quite enough for white to win this convincingly in the endgame. Because, yeah, something like this would be roughly equal. So it's not any extra material there. So she finds the first part. And now king h7. Everything comes down to this moment. I watched it live and Vaishali looked so stressed because she knew, well, they both knew that this was the decisive moment. White now needs to find the right defense. Let me just show you the severity of the situation first. Black has a lot of threats. If white moves away the queen anywhere, somewhere else, then there's rook b2. And if that queen moved away, that means e4 can be played, opening up that bishop. And things get very messy here. Black has enough threats now to keep that initiative going. So it needs to be very precise. The computer is also okay with queen e1, but it's not as clean because there needs to be some very precise moves found. Still winning, but now the only winning move is rook 1 to d3, not the other rook. And black's threats basically ran out. But still, what Vaishali played in the game was the right move. And I stalled a bit of time to see if you want to find it yourself, but it is c4. She was down to 1 minute, and as always, that most important decision for some reason comes on move 40, but she trusted her intuition and c4 was the exact move she needed to make. It looks a bit weakening around the king, but there is now a huge threat of queen h4, which completely reverses the attack and makes black need to defend. And that's why this is so strong. And this is why that g5 move actually ended up being so strong looking back. Now, black is also on move 40, so they need to make a quick decision. And unfortunately for Lagno, there is nothing really left. If the queen comes here to threaten checkmate, there is simply rook d2. If rook to a1, there needs to be some precision with king c2, and everything is safe. So not taking that rook. And if rook to b2, then once again that rook can defend on d2, and everything is very safe. Black cannot really afford any of these endgames. because the extra exchange and those passers are just too much. So Lagno, out of desperation, sacrifices on c4. The queen takes on c4 and rook b2. So the double rook sacrifice, which looks very nice, but black is running out of pieces. One more check is given. The queen comes to f2 with some hopes of the checkmate, but that checkmate is just not there because white has enough pieces to defend. A few more moves were played, but white is fairly safe, and that queen and bishop cannot create any new threat. And after queen g2, Lagno resigns because white just has too much material and all the threats have been defended. With this win, Vaishali became the winner of the candidates tournament and will challenge Ju and Jun for the World Championship title. I think this tournament was full of ups and downs for both Vaishali and for everyone. What's incredible is that Vaishali was the lowest rated seed, but she pushed through, she scored some nice wins, and I really think it was the consistency that got her over the finish line. Because every player in the women's tournament was so close and capable of beating anyone. That's what made these critical moments so important, and it was that consistency that mattered most. I'm very happy for Vaishali. I think she's a very hard worker, and the win was so well deserved. And we've seen some of her game recaps that were all very interesting. Bibisara Asobaiva was another leader coming into the last round, but she ended up drawing her game against Divya and took second place. Zhujiner and Alexandra Goreshkina tied for third. And that's about it for the standings. You can see the rest of them here. I really enjoyed covering the women's candidates on PowerPlayChess, so thank you, Daniel, for having me here and for having such a nice and supportive community on this channel. I hope I see you all again someday. I'm not sure when that will be next, but you can find me on Twitch, you can find me on Chessbase, and hopefully soon on my own YouTube. So I am very happy that there's so many people following women's chess, and I'm glad we got to experience this candidates tournament together. So bye-bye for now, and thank you for watching.